New Year's Eve was supposed to be a happy night. The streets were full of music. Fireworks were already starting to light up the sky. People were laughing, counting down the last hours of the year. But for one young widow, that night turned into something else entirely. She had stepped away for just a moment, only a few minutes. Her twin children were playing nearby, exactly where she told them to stay. When she came back, they were gone. At first she thought they were hiding. Children sometimes do that. She called their names, once, twice. No answer. Her heart started racing. She searched the street, the nearby park, the small store on the corner, every place they usually ran to. Nothing. Minutes turned into an hour. Neighbors began helping her search. Someone suggested calling the police. The fireworks grew louder across the city. Everyone was celebrating the new year. But she was running through dark streets, calling the names of the only two people she had left in the world. Then, just before midnight, she noticed a small house with the lights still on. And through the window, she saw something that made her stop breathing. Her missing twins were sitting at a table, and an elderly woman was feeding them dinner. After her husband passed away, the house felt too quiet. The silence was the hardest part. Before, there was always movement, his voice in the kitchen, his footsteps in the hallway. The sound of him lifting the twins in the air while they laughed. Now it was just the three of them. She learned to move forward slowly, day by day. Routine helped, school mornings, grocery lists. Laundry, homework at the small dining table. The twins were only 5 when their father died, too young to understand everything but old enough to feel the change. Sometimes they asked questions she could not answer. Sometimes they simply hugged her without saying anything. Those small moments kept her going. They had become her whole world. New Year's Eve arrived quietly that year. The town was full of energy. Decorations hung across streets. Neighbors were planning celebrations. Music drifted through open windows. She didn't plan a big night, just something simple. The twins were excited about the fireworks. They had been talking about them all week. She promised they could watch them later from the nearby park where many families gathered. By early evening, the streets were already busy. People were walking in groups, carrying snacks, laughing loudly. The cold air carried the smell of street food and winter smoke. She held both children's hands as they walked. The twins kept asking when the fireworks would start. Soon, she told them with a smile. The park was only a few blocks away. Lights had been set up around the trees. Children were running across the grass while parents stood nearby talking. It felt safe, familiar. She found a bench close to the playground and let the twins run a few steps ahead. They were chasing each other in small circles, laughing loudly. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax. She checked her phone quickly. A message from a neighbor wishing her a happy new year. Another reminder about the fireworks schedule. When she looked up again, the playground looked different, too quiet. She stood up immediately. The swings were moving slightly in the cold wind. A few other children were still there, but her twins were not among them. At first, she assumed they had wandered behind the slide or toward the nearby food stalls. She walked quickly across the playground. "Daniel," she called. Lily, no answer. She checked behind the climbing bars, then the small wooden bridge near the sandbox. Still nothing. Her chest tightened. She moved faster now, scanning every corner of the park. Children ran past her, laughing, holding glowing toys. None of them were hers. The noise of the crowd suddenly felt overwhelming. She called their names again, louder this time. Several people turned their heads, but the faces she was looking for were not there. The space around her felt too large, and for the first time that night, a quiet thought began forming in her mind. The twins were not just playing somewhere nearby. They were gone. At first, she tried to stay calm. Children wander. It happens all the time. She walked quickly to the nearby food stand. A group of kids were gathered there with glowing balloons and cups of hot chocolate. For a moment she thought she saw Lily's small jacket among them. But when the children turned around, none of the faces belonged to her twins. Her heart began to beat faster. She moved toward the edge of the park where families were lining up to buy snacks. The crowd had grown thicker as the evening moved closer to midnight. Laughter filled the air. Music played from speakers somewhere near the fountain. "Excuse me," she said to a woman standing nearby. "Did you see two children run past here, twins, a boy and a girl?" The woman shook her head gently. She kept moving. Her eyes scanned every small group, every pair of running feet. Every child wearing a red jacket or blue hat. "Daniel," she called again. "Lily." This time her voice cracked slightly. A few parents turned toward her. One man asked if she needed help. "My children," she said quickly. "I can't find them." Within minutes, the small circle of people around her began to spread out. Some walked toward the playground again. Others moved toward the street that led out of the park. She followed the path toward the entrance. Maybe they had gone home. Maybe they thought she was already leaving. But the sidewalk outside the park was crowded with strangers. Groups of teenagers walked past holding fireworks. Cars moved slowly along the street. Her twins were nowhere. The cold air suddenly felt sharper. She pulled out her phone and called a neighbor who lived 2 houses away. "Have the kids come home?" she asked quickly. "No," the neighbor replied. "What happened?" "They're missing." The word sounded strange even as she said it. Missing. She hung up and turned back toward the park. More people had joined the search now. Some were calling the twins' names. Others were walking down nearby streets. The sound of fireworks testing in the distance echoed across the town. Bright flashes briefly lit the sky. The celebration had already started, but for her, time felt frozen. She began walking down the smaller streets around the park. Each house looked quiet from the outside. Windows glowed warmly behind curtains. "Daniel," she shouted again. "Lily." Her voice echoed down the empty sidewalk. For a moment she stopped, trying to think clearly. The twins knew the neighborhood well. They had walked these streets many times. They wouldn't go far, unless they followed someone. The thought made her stomach tighten. She moved faster now, turning down another street lined with older houses. Then she noticed something small. One house near the corner still had its kitchen light on. And through the window, she saw movement inside. She slowed down as she approached the house. The street was quiet compared to the crowded park behind her. Most homes were dark, their owners already out celebrating somewhere else. But this house was different. Warm yellow light spilled through the kitchen window. At first, she only saw movement. A figure standing near the table. Someone reaching forward, placing something down. Plates, maybe. Then her eyes adjusted. 2 small shapes were sitting at the table. Her heart skipped. She stepped closer to the window. The shapes moved and suddenly she saw them clearly. Daniel, Lily, her twins. They were sitting side by side in 2 wooden chairs, their small feet dangling above the floor. In front of them were bowls of steaming soup. Pieces of bread rested on a plate between them. For a moment she couldn't breathe. They weren't crying. They weren't scared. They were eating. Across the table sat an elderly woman. Her gray hair was tied loosely at the back of her head. She moved slowly but carefully, placing another piece of bread into Lily's hands. The twins looked comfortable, calm, almost as if they had known this woman longer than a few minutes. The mother's first reaction was relief so strong it made her legs feel weak. Then confusion followed. Why were they here? Why were they sitting with a stranger like this? She moved quickly to the front door and knocked hard, once, then again. Inside, the elderly woman turned her head slightly. She seemed neither surprised nor rushed. A few seconds later, the door opened. The woman stood there, her expression steady, not defensive, not frightened, just calm. "Yes?" she asked gently. The mother rushed past her into the house. Daniel, Lily, both children looked up at the same time. "Mom," Lily said, sliding off the chair. The twins ran toward her, wrapping their arms tightly around her waist. She held them so firmly they almost laughed. "Where did you go?" she asked breathlessly. "I've been looking everywhere." Daniel pointed toward the kitchen table. "The lady brought us here," he said. The mother slowly turned to face the elderly woman again. The woman had already returned to the table. She picked up the soup bowl and placed it closer to where Lily had been sitting. "They were outside alone," the woman said calmly. "It's cold tonight." The mother stared at her, still trying to catch up with what she was seeing. Her children had disappeared in a crowded park. And now they were sitting inside a stranger's kitchen, halfway through dinner, as if this had been planned all along. Something about the scene felt strangely peaceful. But the questions were only beginning. The mother stood in the kitchen doorway, still holding the twins close to her. Her heart was slowly settling, but her mind was racing. The room itself felt warm and ordinary. A small wooden table, old cabinets, a clock ticking quietly on the wall. The smell of soup and bread filled the air. Nothing about the house suggested danger. Still, the situation made little sense. "How did they get here?" she asked carefully. The elderly woman wiped her hands on a small towel and looked toward the children. "They were walking down the street," she said, "not far from the park." The mother frowned. "Alone?" The woman nodded. They looked confused. The boy kept looking back toward the corner. The girl was shivering. The twins glanced at each other. Daniel spoke first. "We were looking for you," he said. "You disappeared," Lily added quietly. The mother felt a quick sting of guilt. In those few minutes when she checked her phone, the twins must have thought she had left. And children don't always wait. The elderly woman pulled out 2 chairs. "You should sit," she said gently. "You look exhausted." The mother hesitated for a moment before sitting down. The twins climbed back into their chairs beside her. The woman placed another bowl on the table. "It's just vegetable soup," she said, "nothing special." The mother thanked her, though her voice still carried uncertainty. "How long have they been here?" she asked. "Not long," the woman replied. "Maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes. That was all it took for fear to completely take over her night. The mother looked around the small kitchen again. There were photographs on the wall. Old ones faded with time. One picture caught her attention. A younger version of the same woman stood beside 2 children, a boy and a girl, twins. The mother's eyes lingered on the photo longer than she expected. The elderly woman noticed. "They're my children," she said quietly. Her voice softened slightly. They were twins too. The room grew still for a moment. The twins continued eating their soup, unaware of the tension between the 2 adults. The mother felt a strange shift in the air. Something about the way the woman spoke felt heavy with memory. "What happened to them?" the mother asked gently. The elderly woman took a slow breath before answering. "Life happened," she said simply. She didn't elaborate. Instead, she looked at the twins again with a quiet expression. "When I saw them walking alone tonight," she continued, "it felt like I was looking at the past for a moment." The mother listened carefully. This woman had not called the police. She had not asked questions first. She had simply brought the children inside, fed them, kept them warm. It wasn't the reaction most people would have, and yet the twins looked completely comfortable. Almost as if they had sensed something safe about her. Outside, the first loud fireworks exploded in the distance. The new year was only minutes away. But inside that small kitchen, time felt strangely paused. For a while, no one spoke. The twins continued eating, dipping small pieces of bread into their bowls. The warmth of the kitchen had made their cheeks slightly pink again. The mother watched them carefully. Just half an hour earlier, she had been running through dark streets calling their names. Every terrible possibility had crossed her mind. Now they were safe, sitting at a stranger's table. The contrast felt unreal. Across from them, the elderly woman moved slowly around the kitchen. She filled a kettle with water and placed it on the stove. Her movements were calm, almost practiced. "You must have been very frightened," the woman said quietly. The mother nodded. I thought something terrible had happened. The woman turned slightly and looked toward the twins again. They weren't afraid, she said, just confused. Daniel spoke with his mouth half full. We thought Mom went home without us. The mother felt that same quick sting again. I only looked away for a moment, she said softly. The elderly woman poured hot water into 2 cups. Children see time differently, she replied. A few minutes can feel like a long time. She carried the cups to the table and placed one in front of the mother. Tea, she said simply. The mother wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Her eyes drifted again toward the photograph on the wall. You said those were your children, she said gently. The elderly woman nodded. They moved far away many years ago. Her voice remained steady, but there was a quiet sadness behind it. We don't see each other much anymore. The mother didn't ask more questions. She understood that some stories take time to tell. Instead, she looked at the twins again. They had finished most of their soup. Lily was now leaning against her arm, sleepy after the excitement. Daniel looked up at the elderly woman. Your soup is really good, he said. The woman smiled faintly. That recipe is very old. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. Outside, the fireworks were growing louder now. Bright flashes filled the sky beyond the window. The elderly woman walked over and gently opened the curtain. Look, she said to the twins. Both children rushed to the window. Colorful explosions lit up the night above the rooftops. Happy New Year, the woman said softly. The mother stood beside them, watching the reflections of the fireworks dance across the glass. For a moment, the fear from earlier in the evening began to fade, but something else stayed in her mind. The way the elderly woman had looked at the twins when they first sat at that table, not with curiosity, not even with simple kindness, but with recognition. The fireworks continued outside, filling the sky with flashes of red and gold. The twins pressed their faces close to the window, pointing excitedly each time another burst lit the dark street. Their laughter slowly replaced the tension that had filled the evening. The mother stood behind them, one hand resting gently on Lily's shoulder. Her heart was finally calming. Just an hour ago, she had been running through the neighborhood, convinced she might never see them again. Now they were safe, warm, and smiling. She turned slightly toward the elderly woman. I don't know how to thank you, she said quietly. The woman shook her head. There's no need, she replied. Her voice was soft but certain. Tonight was just unexpected. The mother looked at her more closely now. The lines on the woman's face were deep but not harsh. They looked like the kind that come from many years of thinking and remembering. Do you live here alone? The mother asked gently. The woman nodded. It's been that way for a long time. She glanced toward the photograph on the wall again. Sometimes the house feels very quiet. The twins turned from the window when another loud firework exploded in the distance. Daniel looked up at the elderly woman. Do you watch fireworks every year? He asked. She smiled faintly. I used to watch them with my children. The words hung in the air for a moment. The mother noticed the way the woman's eyes softened when she looked at the twins, not with sadness alone, but with something deeper, memory. The clock on the wall struck midnight. The twins shouted happily, Happy New Year. Their voices filled the small kitchen. The mother laughed softly for the first time that night. The elderly woman joined them at the window, standing just behind the children as the sky continued to flash with color. For a brief moment, the kitchen felt full again, not with strangers, but with something closer to family. After a while, the fireworks began to fade. The street grew quieter as the celebrations moved elsewhere. The mother helped the twins put on their coats. They're tired, she said softly. The elderly woman walked them to the door. The cold night air rushed in when it opened. Before leaving, the mother turned back. If it's all right, she said, maybe we could visit again sometime. The elderly woman seemed surprised by the offer. Then she nodded slowly. I would like that. The twins waved as they stepped outside. "Goodbye," Lily called. "Thank you for the soup," Daniel added. The door closed gently behind them. The mother held both children's hands as they walked down the quiet street toward home. Behind them, in the warm kitchen window, the elderly woman remained standing for a long moment, watching the place where the twins had been sitting. And for the first time in many years, the house no longer felt quite as empty.